refocus our state business development resources toward helping retain and expand current South Dakota businesses and our state's natural resources, instead of investing so many resources trying to attract companies from other states. Don't get me wrong, we will need to do both, but chambers of commerce across the state and economic development groups have shared this sentiment that there's a need now to rebalance and invest more in ourselves. We'll also partner with private sector banks and investors to expand the available capital and reduce the risk to taxpayers without increasing spending by offering loan guarantees on bank loans for high priority projects instead of making direct taxpayer funded loans from the state. We'll also take a multi-pronged approach to accelerate wind energy development. We'll work with our neighbors in Minnesota on the location and the funding of the transmission lines to facilitate more export of South Dakota wind power. But at the same time, we need to look at opportunities where we can develop wind energy generation next to high-consuming plants or near small towns where one turbine can meet a significant portion of that location's energy needs. Our neighbors in Minnesota and Iowa have been doing this since the 1990s, so it's time for us to participate. So those are just a few points. I would encourage you to review our plan in its entirety. I think you'll find that our grow more with less approach is the right approach. It is the best way for South Dakota to move forward. It's filled with practical ideas, emphasis on entrepreneurship, alternative energy, innovation, and education. And it's a plan that makes sense to business leaders across South Dakota, and it's a plan that we can actually afford. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to present a few points on this, and I really look forward to, and I'm excited to put this plan into motion when we're elected in November. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you for the work that you put into this plan. I've challenged the Lieutenant Governor to a debate about economic development. I just think it's really important that we get down to some basic understanding so that the people of South Dakota see both of our plans clearly so that they can make a judgment. And I just want to focus on 2 points. In the packet that we've distributed, there are 2 documents that I want to call your attention to. One of them is the Governor and Lieutenant Governor's 2010 initiative. You'll remember the 2010 initiative. That was something that was announced with great fanfare about the goals of the Rounds-Dugard administration when they took office 8 years ago. What I've attached is the education portion of the 2010 initiative. It has 6 goals. Near as I can tell, not one of them has been met. Not even close. What makes us think that 4 more years of this administration is going to produce any more in the way of accomplishing those education goals? The reason I point this out in an economic development press conference is because the Dugard plan claims that education is a key part of economic development. While we certainly agree that education is a key to the future of South Dakota, it's hard to believe in an administration that failed in the 6 goals it established after 8 years of on-the-job training to now believe that somehow education is going to be transformed into a significant part of economic development. Coupled with the fact that we've just seen this administration's level of sincerity about education when $26 million arrived for the state of South Dakota, and instead of using it for the stated purpose of education, it was put into the general fund to help stave off a recognition of the lack of priorities and the bloated size of state government. So I think the Lieutenant Governor and I need to have an honest exchange about the actual role of education in the future of South Dakota. The second thing I wanted to visit about is a comparison in the use of the READI Fund. As Ben outlined, our approach will be radically different than what's gone on in the past. In the past, the READI loan, which is about $90 million in South Dakota, is loaned out by a board made up of political appointees. It seems to us that as a part of our pledge to make government more transparent and more accountable, we need to remove the politics from banking and trust bankers to vet projects. And we do that through a loan guarantee process that extends the scope and reach of the dollars available for economic development. In this way, we can take $90 million and move it into a much higher category because it will be a part of the loan, a part of the portfolio, as opposed to the entire thing. This way it requires that entrepreneurs have skin in the game, that banks have skin in the game and vet the projects, and that the state of South Dakota assists them. This is the right way to go in terms of economic development. But again, in comparison to the Dugard plan, here is what he says. He is going to add $60 million, $60 million to the Ready Fund loan, which already has $90 million in it. Where is he going to get $60 million? Well, he doesn't really say. What he says in the plan is that he will audit the state's assets and determine if he can sell any of the state's assets. Well, you know, of course, that I react to that because for the last few legislative sessions, I have proposed, with bipartisan support, that we in fact do sell some of the assets of the state, namely airplanes. Gene Abdullah and I sponsored a bill in each of the last 2 years to do exactly that, and it was killed by the very administration that now tells you they're going to sell assets to fund economic development. I think that raises a real question about the sincerity of that plan and whether it is at all realistic. But of course, we all know the elephant in the room here. It's not 60 more million, it's 107 million they have yet to account for in terms of the deficit going forward. As the next governor of South Dakota in January, when I'm sworn in, I will assume a $107 million deficit created on this administration's watch. I've told you exactly how I'm going to deal with it. We have yet to hear how the lieutenant governor is going to deal with the $107 million deficit, let alone the $60 million price tag he's put on an economic development plan based solely on the sale of assets he refuses to identify. That's not realistic, and the people of South Dakota deserve something better. But finally, I want to point out to you that I think the final document I attached, maybe it's the Education 2010 initiative that's the final document, but there's a Newsweek article I've attached. You know, whenever the question comes up, is what Ben and I are talking about, is that realistic? Can that really be done? Has it been done anywhere? Absolutely it's been done. You guys have been at these press conferences before, and I've provided you with a Wall Street Journal article about Mitch Daniels and the incredible work he's done in Indiana since being elected. He has transformed that state. How did he do it? He did it by controlling the growth in government. He did it by reversing the trend for increasing spending. He did it by reducing the number of state employees in state government. He did it by privatizing certain roles in state government. For Mitch Daniels, the primary example was to privatize the toll roads, the Indiana Turnpike, which turned out to make, well, the article will give you the details of how much, but he's taken a $400 million or a $1.3 billion deficit and turned it into a $400 million surplus in the state of Indiana just in the last few years. It's incredible, but it shows you the amazing regenerative power of a state when you control public spending and you unleash the private enterprise system. That's what Ben and I have been talking about doing. We believe there are all kinds of opportunities to privatize state functions that South Dakota has never really investigated, whether it is how we manage the Medicaid caseload or whether it is any of the other functions of state government, from transportation to welfare to social services. We need to ask the hard questions. Is it essential that we employ state workers to do that, or can we trust the cues and the incentives of the private enterprise system and in fact reduce the cost of state government while we increase the efficiency of providing essential services? That's what our economic development plan is all about. I look forward to the chance to debate with the Lieutenant Governor about these very ideas. We had a bit of it last night. We had a debate before the home builders here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and we started to discuss some of these issues. I got to challenge the Lieutenant Governor on where in the world he's coming up with $60 million new dollars for the Ready Fund, and he responded, I think pretty appropriately, to his written report, which is he's going to look for assets that he can sell. None have been identified so far. On the other hand, we've been identifying them, not the last few months, but for the last couple of years in the legislative process and now in this campaign. We are excited about the future in South Dakota, but we have to understand that the next administration needs a plan to take care of the deficit that is 9% of the entire revenue stream of the state, and will set this state on a course of progress in terms of confining the growth of state government to unleash the power of the private sector. Ben and I would be glad to take any questions that you have, and thank you.